Hello, everyone. This is the Catholic Esquire. Well, many of the influencers are putting out 100-day videos, articles, blog posts, whatever, giving their opinions and analysis of Pope Leo's first 100 days in the papal office. And so I thought I'd contribute and throw my opinions into the ring and see what you all think, because I have to tell you, what I'm going to say today is probably going to be a lot different than you're hearing anywhere else, quite frankly. And look, I don't mean to say I told you so. The bottom line is what we're dealing with here is Leo is proving that myself and a few others were right. This is Francis 2.0. This is Francis 2.0. And in fact, after the 100 days, what I'm beginning to realize is it's actually going to be worse than previously thought. Now, I say all this at the risk of being called a doomer, super angry, dishonest, schismatic. These are things that are being thrown around out there in order to discredit people like me who are saying, yeah, you know what? Leo's a real problem. He's as big of a problem as Francis. In fact, he's probably going to be worse. And I'm going to explain to you why by the end of this video. But those are the invectives that are being thrown around in order to discredit, because there clearly is an other ongoing agenda here. It just cannot be denied at this point. And yes, I'm talking about the trad Catholic influencers. There is something there. They have been told to stand down. We are going to take the public position of wait and see, which basically means we're not going to criticize things that we otherwise would have criticized when Francis was around. We're going to ignore bad things when they happen. We're going to inflate and make a bigger deal out of the little things that we never would have made a big deal about under Francis. We're going to shift the narrative. We're going to deny common sense, and we're going to gaslight people into thinking that something is actually going to change for the positive in the church. So what I'm going to do is throw some water on all of that flaming excitement and ruin the party. But I have to say, my friends, that it's called reality and it's called truth. It's called stripping away all the BS and getting to the root of the matter, and not suspending our reason and not suspending our common sense. Because a lot of these guys in professional Catholic media, they're smart guys, right? I mean, they're they're knowledgeable. They went to Steubenville. They read a lot of Catholic books. They're holy. I'm sure they're more holy than I am. I'm not going to deny that. But when it comes to giving analysis on church politics, there's just not their thing. Okay. They clearly have demonstrated they can't be relied on to give good, solid analysis of things that are coming out of Rome. What it really takes is more of a skeptical mind, but one who's been experienced in real politics in the real world to see what's happening. Because you have to remember, just as Vatican II wanted, the church is now part of the modern world. The church accepts modern ideas. The church accepts modern beliefs. The church accepts modern tactics, political tactics. Okay. This is part of the problem. This is part of the crisis, but we have to acknowledge the reality so we know what we're dealing with, instead of putting up fantasy worlds and utopian worlds, which is what we're seeing now since Leo was elected. So what am I talking about here? Well, it reminds me a lot of 2020, and I have to be careful here because of the platform with my words. But, in 2020, early 2020, the plague comes down, right? And at first I was a little skeptical about it. I'm like, yeah, this seems a little weird, but there's a little bit too much attention and excitement to what's looks like a cold or flu virus. And then you start to see the government going into place. You see, at first, this is what I saw in the beginning of March of 2020. You saw orders coming down. We're going to shut down the liquor stores, everything, the liquor stores, even the marijuana stores, everything's going to be shut down. And then literally, and this actually is a true scenario. This is a true case. Uh, in Denver, the metropolitan area of Denver, they literally ordered the liquor stores to shut down, and 2.5 hours later, they were ordered to reopen, or given permission to reopen within 2.5 hours on the same day. Well, because everyone became angry and immediately flooded the entire city building and complained, and literally the order was reversed in 2.5 hours. People make T-shirts about it now. They call it the 2.5 hour prohibition of Denver. It's hilarious. I knew right then the whole thing was a fraud. I knew this is real. Something else is going on here. There's something else being promoted here. And so then we heard the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then that 2 weeks becomes 4 weeks and 6 weeks and 8 weeks. And then it's like, oh, they're trying to sell jabs. They're trying to get all of us to take a jab. That's what's happening here. I figured that out in 2020. And of course, by 2021, that's exactly what happened. And I turned out to be completely right. But the whole time you could just see it, right? Regardless of what all the fluff going on the TV, the experts and the scientists and blah, 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 you could just tell by analyzing the situation using common sense, some life experience, things like that, that the whole thing was fake. The whole thing was a fraud. It was a scam. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't see that and they bought into it. And there were some real significant consequences, um, very significant mortal consequences, quite frankly. So, and I bring all of this up because I'm seeing the same thing happen in the church today. And that early March 2020 moment for me came the moment that Leo was elected to that conclave. Because the day before, you saw people saying, oh, it would be terrible if Prevost got elected. This is the worst case scenario. We do not want that. What a terrible idea. And then the next day, oh, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this great? I can't wait to submit to him because he's going to be so fantastic, by the same people who were criticizing him 2 days earlier. So you're like, okay, well, something happened in that day time frame, right? I mean, we all watched the election part. Something else happened. Something else went on behind the scenes. Now, we're never really going to know for sure. Just like in 2020, I'm pretty positive some sort of memo went out. I don't know what kind of memo. I don't know the nature of the message and who was spreading it. But there was something very similar that happened here. Something went out. And I made that video right after the election of Leo, and I said something happened here. There was a deal that was cut. I've just seen it too many times in my own personal experience in politics, at the highest levels of state politics, behind the scenes stuff, where all the sausage is made, the stuff people don't see. I can just tell some deal was cut between some people. The message got out to traditional media to stand down. Hey, this is going to be okay for us. Stand down. And that's what happened. It's just obvious. And you can see it by comparing and contrasting the before and after election videos, the ones that are still there. A lot of the previous videos and articles have been deleted for obvious reasons. So, what I'm trying to say here, my friends, is that at the end of the day, we have Francis 2.0, and it's actually worse because the marketing strategy has now changed. It's the marketing strategy has changed in order to advance the delusion, in order to advance the fantasy, the kayfabe. If you're familiar with professional wrestling, that metaphor, it's an important one, and it fits very well. The marketing has changed because we all know Bergoglio's problem, and even the modernists realized it. This guy has a PR problem. Bergoglio, he shoots off at the mouth. He comes across as an Argentinian bar bouncing thug. He doesn't know how to talk to people correctly. He's not smooth. He's a Peronist, right? So he tells one guy one thing and the other guy another thing the same day. If necessary, he'll throw a hammer down and just crush somebody if he thinks it's useful. It's just pure gangster style thuggery. Well, someone figured out like, hey, this is not helping move the Vatican II agenda along. We like what Bergoglio says. That's why they promote it. They say, oh, isn't it great theology and beautiful documents, even though it's rife with heresy. They like that stuff, the doctrinal stuff that's good. They didn't like the image. They didn't like the tactics. And so they needed to get a guy in that would help neutralize the traditional backlash. And it turned out it worked great. They knew this guy. They knew Prevost could pull this off. He's not afraid to wear traditional garb. He's not even afraid to use Latin once in a while. he might even talk about Jesus Christ, and then we can talk about how Christocentric he is just because he mentions Jesus once in a while, something that Bergoglio rarely did. And all of a sudden it works, right? Because we have new marketing, new PR, a new image that's going out, and we're all told, at the risk of being called schismatic, doomer, angry, that you have to buy into it. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. You're the kook. You're the freak because you're skeptical about what you see in front of you because it defies common sense. You need to put all of that aside and just go with the program. That's what happened in 2020. That's what's happening now. Now, my friends, I will tell you, this isn't the case everywhere. There are pockets of continuing resistance to destroying the Catholic Church, resistance to changing the doctrines, resistance to all the bad stuff you're seeing right now that no one wants to really mention or talk about. And it's forming a new community, I think, on Substack. I've been really impressed with the traditional community that's been growing on Substack. There's been a lot of good discussions, even involving, Sedevacantists who have been spending their whole lives studying this stuff, the ecclesiology and all these things, because that's where it comes down to in most cases when you're trying to understand the crisis of the church. These discussions now are going back and forth between people of goodwill, in good faith, and it's very exciting. So one of the most recent articles was done by Stephen Cox. I'm going to put a link to his article in the description of this video. He goes through and outlines what's happened in under the Leo papacy in the last 100 days. He gives us some highlights. I'm just going to mention a few of them right now. The first thing he mentions is he's continuing to point women to positions of authority and power within Rome over clerics. He's already continued to do that. Francis began that, and then Leo's continuing to do that with the appointment of that Sister Tiziana Marletti. He's continued to presumably support Tuco Fernandez. There's been absolutely no movement whatsoever to remove him or to minimize him or anything. He's continuing to do his job. As far as I can tell, he's being completely supported. Yet there's been no correction of him, of course. We're continuing on with the environmental theme, so we're going to continue with the Laudato Si stuff. We're going to continue with the Mass for Care of Creation stuff, care for common home. We're going to put all this materialistic, humanistic things above devotion to God, above proper worship of God. We're going to continue to promote the Laudato Si agenda, which, by the way, my friends, no one's talking about this. Laudato Si is a theological document. It's not just a wacky left-wing environmentalist screed, okay? No one has ever been talking about that. No, Laudato Si is very theological. It's all modernist. It's all anti-Catholic, and it's bad. It comes from Karl Rahner. At some point, I'm going to have to talk more about that. Anyway, that agenda is continuing to move forward and being implemented, even with new masses based on it. The Synodal Church, of course, that stuff's being not just promoted, it's being implemented. Under Leo, the document implementing the final stage of synodality has begun. The final 3-year stage, which will culminate in a 2028 assembly, is already been issued under his name. That is moving forward. I did a video explaining what was in that document a couple weeks back. You can go on and on and on. Another big red flag is that Cardinals like Supich are very supportive of Leo. They think he's doing a great job. They're publicly saying and commending him for things. That's a perfect example. If Cardinal Supich had come out and totally supported someone under Francis, that would have raised red flags. That would have completely raised red flags. And now under Leo, it's not. We just pretend it doesn't happen. We ignore it. We pretend like it doesn't exist. Because we're in this new delusional fantasy land where we're going to pretend that somehow, if Leo isn't traditional, that somehow he's just going to govern better, maybe, govern better. We can just hope for better governance. What difference does the governance of the church make if he doesn't believe the faith? People seem to forget. See, I'm sounding angry here. Forgive me. What difference does it make if you govern the church well and you don't believe the doctrine? Of course it doesn't matter, but that's the lines we're getting. So, my friends, we do need to calm down. We need to look at this rationally. Don't lose our minds. Don't suspend our reason. Don't suspend our common sense. Think about what it means to defend our Lord Jesus Christ. And rather than stand down and raise a white flag, maybe we actually need to be bolder, stronger, more militaristic, and say, we're going to start calling out people who are lying to us. We're going to start calling out people who are gaslighting to us. I don't care how holy you are, honestly. You may be the most holiest person in the world. You can pray a lot. You can do all the devotions that, all of that stuff. And that's great. And maybe that is where you should, narrow your focus and talk about. But when it comes to matters of church, when it comes to matters of, of, of Vatican II and how it's destroying the church and destroying the faith of people and ultimately eternal souls, maybe that's not your thing. But if you're going to continue to talk about it and you're going to continue to hurt the cause and you're going to continue to promote these things that are destroying the church, then you need to be pushed back against as well. I'm sorry. And maybe that needs to be our attitude here. What happened to the missionary attitude that Catholics used to have? Just think of Lepanto, think of the Spanish conquerors, think of those good and holy Englishmen under the reign of Archbishop Cranmer, where the mass was being suppressed, and they literally went to war over it. Think about that. This is the way Catholics operate. We have to fight for our Lord Jesus Christ, but we have to be smart about it too. To be smart. So, I encourage you to check me out on Substack. I'm of course still on X, but there's a lot of other good stuff going on Substack. Again, check out the Stephen Cox article. I'll post there. But there's a lot of other good stuff going on where people of you know uh, truly of good faith trying to do the best and figure all of this stuff out. We may not agree on every aspect of the crisis, but everyone agrees that the crisis is a problem and something needs to be done about it. And quite frankly, it's not going to be coming directly through the hierarchy right now because we're under siege. The church itself, the hierarchy, is under attack. It's under siege by people who don't believe in Catholicism. So, with that, my friends, please share this video if you find it useful. We need to continue to spread the message, get this out. These sorts of talks and discussions need to get out to the Novus Ordo people. This needs to get into those parishes. And that was very important to Francis that never happened. That's why he was very interested in isolating the traditional movement and putting them into back corners or, parishes out in the wilderness so they couldn't have that interaction with your typical Novus Ordo pew sitter. Because once this flame of tradition and desire to promote real Catholicism, pre-Vatican II Catholicism, gets out there and it catches fire in the Novus Ordo pew sitting land, it can't be stopped. So we need to continue to spread the message, like the channel, share the videos, check out the links I provide. We're just going to keep pushing along. We're going to keep pushing on the fight. We'll see what happens in the next 100 days under Leo. Pray for Leo, but also pray for all the few good bishops and priests that are left out there who are fighting to defend our Lord, fighting to defend the faith and the doctrines and the truth. Pray for them also, and pray for the restoration of the traditional Latin Mass. Thank you for listening, and God bless.